Boker Tov, good morning TABC, faculty and students. Today is Yom HaShoah, a day to commemorate the lives of the 6 million Kiddushim, pure Jewish souls who died in the Holocaust, Al-Kiddush Hashem. Shoah is the Hebrew word for whirlwind. It is the term used to describe the inferno that swept up 6 million Jewish souls between 1938 and 1945. A war was waged against the Jews, and unspeakable atrocities were perpetrated against a defenseless people. Men and women, young and old alike, were butchered at the hands of the Nazis. And every year on Yom HaShoah, we remember the martyrs who sanctified the name of Hashem in the camps, the ghettos, and in the gas chambers. What few people know is that Yom HaShoah's full name is actually Yom HaZikaron LaShoah V'Lagvura, Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day. Never forget the courage and heroism of the Kiddushim, not just in well-known uprisings like the one in Warsaw Ghetto or lesser-known ones in Bialystok and Vilna, but in their spiritual defiance as well. Just because the Jews were victims of the Nazi machine does not mean that they were passive. Many endured this unimaginable suffering and loss and went on to rebuild homes and families and ultimately create a generation of Jews. What better way to memorialize these 6 million souls than to strengthen our commitment to Judaism, intensify our study of Torah, and link ourselves to those who came before us, B'tzror HaChaim, in the bond of everlasting life. I'd like to thank Ms. Donna Honig for coordinating all aspects of today's program, as well as Ms. Carrie Riker, who filmed and put together the many moving pieces of today's virtual presentation, especially since we can't be together in person. Special thanks as well to Mrs. Carrie Reichart, the architect of our Holocaust Studies curriculum at TABC, and her students, who will be presenting over the next 35 minutes. It is my privilege to now introduce one of those students, TABC senior Ari Gross.
For the dead and the living, we must bear witness. These are the famous words of survivor Elie Wiesel. For not only are we responsible for the memories of the dead, we are also responsible for what we are doing with those memories. It is of utmost importance that we honor the 6 million who perished in the Holocaust on this commemorative day. Elie Wiesel may have passed in 2016, but his presence is still with us. We continue to tell his story, and most importantly, we pass on his message to be carried from generation to generation. Someday, not too long from now, there will be no remaining survivors left. I, along with my Holocaust Studies classmates, was fortunate enough to hear the testimonies of several survivors firsthand. And I strongly encourage everyone to avail themselves of that opportunity in the near future, because our time is running out. Soon, nobody will be able to hear their stories firsthand. Nobody will truly understand the cruelty of the perpetrators and the resilience of the victims. And nobody will recall the faces of the past, those who never lived to tell their tale. Because of this, we must listen to the stories of the few remaining survivors. We must tell them to our children, who in return will tell them to their own children, and so forth. For when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. And so I call upon my peers to light 6 symbolic candles together, each to commemorate and honor their relatives, to ensure that their legacies will never be forgotten.
My grandfather, Samuel Bergenbaum, was born May 18, 1926 in Tomaszów Lubensky, southern Poland, the 4th of 5 children. The family was well-to-do until September of 1939, when the Germans began bombarding the town. My grandfather's family was split up, his father and older siblings crossing into Russia, while he, his mother, younger siblings remained in Tomaszów. My grandfather knew that the town was to be made Junified the next day, so he and his brother hid in a barn for 2 weeks, sneaking back to Tomaszów at night to beg or steal food, and they decided to take their chances on a wood mill work camp about 5 kilometers from Tomaszów. They walked through the fields to avoid being seen, and they became laborers at Tarnowanka, working for a Szezek Jewish engineer who needed workers. They worked there from November 1942 to April of 1943. and one night they were surprised by SS personnel and searchlights and SS vans, which took them all to Majdanek. Here the conditions were indescribable, constant beatings with axe handles and killings. My grandfather and Israel remained together in a barrack, and then in late July, the Sharzisko camp was being evacuated, and they were standing on another selection to be sent to Buchenwald. My grandfather said that he was actually selected to be put on a truck to be killed, but his life was saved by a Jewish policeman at Sharzisko, who told him not to go into the line and to be ordered to return back to the barracks. Later, he and his brother were transported from Sharzisko to Buchenwald. Once arriving in Buchenwald, the Germans tortured him to snitch on the bad guys from Sharzisko. He remembers being given a needle shot in the chest with a blue liquid, and then was put to Schleben after being tortured. Shortly after arriving at Schleben, both he and his brother Israel were working in a building in the forest, filling grenade heads with liquid explosives. The two worked the night shift and then were in the building. On October 12, 1944, there was a massive explosion. Two nearby bunkers setting off several secondary explosions. The whole thing went, is how my grandfather recalled it. He was hit full force by the explosion and knocked unconscious. He recalled his brother yelling, "I'm blind, I can't see." Blood poured from his face. Israel was taken on a death march towards Buchenwald and ultimately to Theresienstadt. My grandfather also ended up at Theresienstadt, but carried by train. They were reunited on May 8th. They were liberated together by the Russian army. Subsequently, although encouraged to return to Russian-controlled territory, the brothers were coached by the Russian Jewish officer not to go back. It was not a good idea. They instead went to Poland. After liberation, he went to Germany, where they were in a DP camp called Bamberg. But they heard that my great-grandfather, Jacob, was still alive. Grandpa returned again to Poland and found his father in Lublin and brought him to Germany. The entire family, aided by Jacob's brother in Waterbury, Connecticut, came to the United States in July 1949. Soon after, my grandfather was drafted and served in the Army of Military Intelligence during the Korean War. After the Army, he went to a jewelry business with his brothers and had a store on 47th Street in New York City. He retired in 1986. He has not spoken much about his past. It lives with you, but who can you tell it to? He says. But he shared a great deal with my father, and he's traveled back in the 1990s to Majdanek and Tomashov, and in 2004 to Belzec, where his mother and younger brother were murdered.
Shmuel Yaakov Karmelewski, my great-grandfather, was born on May 18, 1916, in a Polish town called Zelov, about a 40-minute trip outside Lodz. He grew up in an observant Hasidic household and went to Cheder at a young age. As a young man, he attended the Alexander Yeshiva. The plan was for him to become a rabbi, to go into chinuch. The plan was to get married and live a normal life. This was the plan, until September 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland. In 1941, he was sent to the Lodz ghetto. After the ghetto was liquidated by the Nazis, he was sent to a smaller concentration camp, and ultimately, about a year later, ended up in Auschwitz. My great-grandfather, in his mid-20s at the time, was a very smart and clever man. He was very resourceful and always managed to find extra food. He even learned to sew pockets at the bottom of his pants in order to hide extra food, or really anything that size that was worth hiding. As clever and resourceful as he was, his enormous heart was what defined him. He would search for and find food discarded by the Nazis, knowing that had they found him snooping in those areas, they would shoot him instantly. Many years later, people would go over to my Saba and tell him how his father, my great-grandfather, saved their lives with that extra food. He was in Auschwitz until January 1945, when the Russians were approaching that area of Poland. Out of fear, the Nazis started closing up Auschwitz and sending the prisoners on trains back to Germany. The Russians believed that the people in these trains were Germans fleeing back to Germany, so they disabled the train tracks. Following this, people would break out of the trains and they would start running, with Nazis and bullets following them. I am up here now telling his story only because when an SS officer caught up to him and had a clear shot at him, ready to take his life, his gun jammed. After the war, he managed to make his way to a displaced persons camp in Frankfurt after hearing that some of his family members were there. He met up with 3 of his siblings, the only remaining immediate family that survived through the war, and a few months later married my great-grandmother. 9 months later, my grandfather was born. Unlike the rest of his family who made Aliyah, my great-grandfather decided to move to America and was sponsored by an uncle who lived in Maine. Finding a job in Maine was difficult. He didn't have any official training due to his intention of becoming a rabbi pre-war, and even if he could figure something out, the job would require him to work on Shabbos. He was in touch with some of the people he knew from the Holocaust who lived in Paterson, New Jersey, and they told him that they could manage to find him a job. With no hesitation, he moved to Paterson and began his life in America. He retired at 62 and moved to Israel. In 1998, he passed away from leukemia. My great-grandparents have 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren.
My Zeta Paul was born in Antwerp, Belgium on March 17, 1924. He spent the first 16 years of his life living a relatively upper-class life. On May 10, 1940, the Germans invaded Belgium and France. His parents, brother, and much of his extended family went to Le Pen, France, and they stayed there for a few months. They returned to Antwerp in May of 1941, thinking that the terror would pass as it did during World War I. But unfortunately, in June 1941, they realized that they would have to leave Antwerp forever. That was the beginning of their journey. My Zeta's mother and younger brother got out on the last ship to leave for England, but my Zeta, who at 16 was very tall, and his father were prevented from boarding the ship as it was only taking mothers and children. His mother and brother got to England safely and were able to join extended family members living there. My Zeta was left in Lille with his father and many aunts, uncles, and cousins. They formed their own group and traveled to the countryside together. Their goal was to get out of Europe. My Zeta had an additional problem. As a minor, he was listed on his mother's passport. He was no longer with his mother, so they had to find a forger who was able to add him to his father's passport. My Zeta and their group traveled mostly by foot through Belgium, France, and Spain. In Spain, they tried to get on a boat to America, but they could not get the papers required to get to America. Through bribery and help from many of their friends, they were able to get a transit visa to Cuba in December 1941. The transit visa gave them 3 months to stay, but fortunately for them, the Cuban government was extremely corrupt, and they extended their stay by bribing the police with a monthly stipend. His mother and brother, meanwhile, were able to leave London and go to Halifax, Canada. The family stayed in touch by sending letters to each other through a cousin living in neutral Switzerland. They reunited in Cuba and applied for visas to America. They were finally approved and reached New York in 1947. My Zeta always said that there was no way to count the number of miracles that saved him and his family. Choosing the right side of a fork in the road instead of the left, or crossing borders before the guards realized their papers were false, were just a few of his personal nisim. It wasn't until I had to bring in a family heirloom for an immigration project in Yavne that I sat down and heard my Zeta's story. He told me about his life, and he showed me a gold ring that his father had made for him. His father knew that their journey to escape Belgium would be very dangerous and that they could not take much with them. So he had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for my Zeta. The design wasn't pretty, but the value was in the weight of the gold. If all else failed, they would have the 2 rings to bribe the soldiers. My Zeta sent the ring home with my grandmother so that I could bring it in for my project, but he couldn't sleep without it, so I decided to bring my Zeta to school instead. This way I had both the ring and my Zeta. My Zeta said that he cherished this ring and told me that whenever he felt depressed or worried, he would turn the ring on his finger and remember that he had survived much worse. The ring was his link to the past, and when he died, he left it for me to be my link to the future so that his story would never be forgotten. My Opa was born in Fulda, Germany in 1922. When he was 9 years old, his father died, leaving him the man of the house. He helped raise his younger brother and sister together with his mother, with whom he grew exceptionally close. On November 9, 1938, Fulda, among many other towns and cities, turned on their Jews. The peaceful town they once knew was no more. Schools were burnt, Jewish businesses were destroyed, and many Jews were deported to concentration camps, including my Opa. He was just a 16-year-old boy who should have never been included in the roundup to the concentration camps. But because one of the rabbis of the town was hiding, it left one more spot open for the Nazis to take my Opa to Buchenwald. My Opa spent 6 gruesome weeks in Buchenwald, seeing and experiencing unspeakable and unimaginable suffering that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After those 6 weeks, due to his young age, he was able to go on a kinder transport, returning him home and reuniting him with his sister and brother for a very short time before they left for Holland. Soon after arriving in Holland, my Opa was able to find someone to sponsor him to come to America, as long as he swore to work for them. He had a relative in New York, the Rosenwalds, who were part owners of Sears, Roebuck and Company. There was only one problem. Saturday was the busiest day of the week for retail businesses, and they would only sponsor him if he would work on Shabbos. They felt that this was a small price to pay for saving his life. They didn't just want a verbal commitment, they wanted a written contract that he would work on Shabbos. My Opa was still only 16 years old at the time. He didn't know whether he should abandon all that he has ever learned from growing up in a religious family or he should disobey the teaching of giving your life for the 3 cardinal sins. My Opa then took the contract to his rabbi and explained to him his problem, and the rabbi responded, "Sign the contract. It is the only way you'll survive." Then the rabbi grabbed my Opa's hand and told him to promise him he would never violate Shabbos once he was safe. So that's what my Opa did. He never broke Shabbos. Shortly after signing the contract, he set sail for America. Soon after, my Opa arrived at Ellis Island. The Rosenwalds helped support my Opa for 6 months. They sent him to school so he could learn English, American history, and American culture. They gave him food and hospitality too. But after those 6 months, they told him that he now had to begin working. They told him that if he would work hard 7 days a week, he would have a bright future in the company and make a great living. Once they said, "Remember your commitment to work on Saturday," he knew he couldn't do it. He knew he had a bigger commitment and promise he needed to keep. They told him that if he walked away, they would have nothing to do with him and that he would be all alone. So my 16-year-old Opa was all alone with absolutely nothing to his name and nowhere to go. Fortunately, he found work assembling wallets. Soon after finding the job, he learned that Holland had been taken over by the Nazis and that his brother and sister were sent to Bergenbaum, then to Sobibor where they died. His beloved mother was taken to the Riga ghetto where she died. To make a long story short, my Opa was drafted into the American Army, then got married to my Oma when he returned. They had 5 children, including my Pa, my Opa's only son. He worked relentlessly to provide for his family and to be able to give his family a Jewish education. His children all grew up and had children of their own, but when he was finally ready to settle down and enjoy life, his daughter and granddaughter were killed in a fire caused by carbon monoxide. Through all the pain and suffering he endured, he never lost faith and belief in Hashem. No matter the questions, doubt, and challenges that plagued him, he only grew closer to God. He and my Oma made Aliyah in their 70s because they felt closer to God there. They split their time between Israel and Miami Beach, but after a while it became too difficult to go back and forth, so they stayed in Miami Beach where my Opa later passed away at the age of 92. He left behind a legacy and a family, including 19 grandchildren and 55 great-grandchildren, all of whom are religiously observant Jews. My Opa lost his father when he was 9 years old, left his family so he could survive, came to this country at 16 with absolutely nothing, after surviving the worst atrocity in the history of humanity, and he buried a child and a grandchild. He had every excuse in the world to abandon faith, to reject Hashem, to violate Shabbos, and to put Judaism behind him, but he only grew closer to God. He would refer to God as Hashem Yisbarach, and would talk about him like they were best friends. Even on his deathbed, he expressed nothing but gratitude to his best friend, Hashem Yisbarach, for the great life he was granted and for all the blessings he merited to receive. I am lighting this candle in memory of Yaakov Pesach ben Yechiel Cheskel ben Nechama. I am lighting this candle in memory of Aaron Halevi ben Yehuda V'Yetel.
I am lighting this candle in memory of Shmuel Yaakov ben Yaakov Be'ela Bergenbaum. And this one.
I am lighting these candles in memory of Shmuel Yaakov ben Avram Yitzchak ben Marshall.
Throughout my life, I have met many very spiritual and influential people. No one quite like my grandfather, Mr. George Blank, or as I know him, Pa. Pa has always been there as a source of light, as a source of inspiration, and as a pure person who's always there to give me any advice that I ever need. I believe we can all learn something from Pa. So without further ado, Pa.
Good evening, Uri,
Good evening.
and
Thank
good
you. Thank
evening
you
to all
for,
your classmates and teachers at TABC. It's great to have an opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. So to jump right in, could you please tell us a little bit about your pre-war life, what your family was like, how life was, if it was, you know, a normal life.
Yeah. Well, the Jewish community in Poland, where I was born, has a long history, close to 1,000 years, and much of that history was bad, with a lot of persecution. But in the 20th century, particularly after World War I, there was a renaissance in Europe, in many countries, including Poland. So after World War I, Jews were accepted into society. They could go to universities. They could be involved in many other kind of businesses than they were before. We live in a town named Rzeszów. In Yiddish, it's called Reisha. It's in the southeastern part of Poland. And the town was 24,000 people when I was born, and 14,000 were Jews. I was born in 1938, and a year and a half later, in 1939, on September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. So in Zlochów, we had some neighbors, and I don't know what happened, whether they heard my grandparents speaking Yiddish, something, but one of our Polish neighbors decided that on the third floor in that apartment, there was a Jewish family, and they called the police. And police came and they knocked on the door and they want to see our papers. Now, all the Aryans, all the Polish people had papers that said that they're Christians, that they live here, they work here, whatever. The Jews did not have papers. So we didn't have papers. So of course they arrested us and they put us into the Zlochów ghetto.
I know that you are a man who always has Hashem on his side and always believes in Emunah, Mitachon, and Hashem. Do you have any stories that you're willing to share of your time in either the Lvov or the Zlochów ghetto that demonstrated Hashem was on your side, or kept you on your feet, feeling strong that that Hashem was always looking out for you?
Yeah. One of the themes, and we know this from our studies, and if we think about it, and I call it the Nachshon ben Aminadav principle in our story, in all of our stories. And that is that the Hashem does not expect us, we are not expected to count on miracles. There are miracles that are happening all around us all the time, right? The sun comes up every day somehow, and seeds grow and trees grow and they go away and they come back, big miracles. We're used to them, so we don't really look at them as miracles. But Hashem does not want us to sit around waiting for miracles. He wants us to act. So there are many Jewish communities who are God-fearing, wonderful, mitzvah-driven, wonderful people, but they made a mistake of saying, we're decent people, we're Torah observant, let's just sit here and pray, and God will save us from the Germans. And they were all killed. Right. Because that's not the way that our system works. Our system is that the Almighty wants us to act ourselves. He will do his part. He always will do his part, but he doesn't want us to rely. So I'll give you an example of that. When we were in Lvov ghetto, the big ghetto, uh, as I said, our family had money, but food was very scarce. And at first, you could go to the barbed wire perimeter, and there were Polish people selling food all the time. Germans let them, and you could just buy whatever you wanted. But as the ghetto got packed, you couldn't do that. So my mother decided, a very brave woman, decided that she would go outside of the ghetto, go shopping for the family. And she was shopping at a store, and some woman, Polish woman, accused her of being, you're Jewish, you're Jewish. And she said, no, I'm not, you're Jewish. And they started fighting, arguing. And my mother could mix it up with the best of them, so she was taking nothing. But a policeman went by, and he saw the ruckus, and he looked in, see what's going on. This was not a German now, this was a Polish policeman. And several people said that my mother's Jewish. So he pulled my mother out and he said, please, very nicely, ma'am, could I see your papers? Well, you already know the story of the papers. My mom said, oh, I left them in my other coat, I didn't bring them. He says, no, you didn't, you're Jewish, and I can see the outline of your star on your coat. So he grabbed her by the arm, and he pulled her, and I'm behind the caboose. She's holding me. I'm bouncing around behind, and he's taking her to the police station. The system was, when you got arrested and you were Jewish and you were out of the ghetto, they took you to the police station, and they would line you up, put you against the wall on the outside, and shoot you. And if you were a baby, you were like a woman with a baby in a carriage, they didn't waste bullets on babies. They pick the baby up by the feet, and they swing it and smash the baby's head against the wall. So we knew this. And so he's pulling my mom, and she's pulling me, and we're going. People are stopping, looking. It's sort of a curiosity. And we came to a little park. We had to cross a little park where there was grass. And as we were crossing the park, my mom dropped to her knees and grabbed his leg, the leg that was behind as he was walking. And he turned around, looked at her, was ready to hit her. And she said to him, for the sake of the child, let us go. Now, I don't know what went through his mind, but he looked at her, he looked at me, and he said, get the hell out of here, Jew, and go back to the ghetto where you belong. That was Hashem's hand in saving us. That was a miracle. But it was only a miracle because my mom was taking the action. She went out and tried to provide for the family. She fought to keep her independence. She acted against and so forth. And then she was blessed with a miracle. Because there's no way that this policeman should have let us go. No way.
Right.
But he did. And that's the reason I'm here speaking to you all today. Fortunately for our family, the five of us, my mother's youngest brother, whose name was Emil Silver, named Milek, was a very, very courageous, very charismatic young guy, single guy. And he somehow, he was in the town of Zlochov also, and he was working for a German officer. And in the process of doing all these things, he learned that the Germans were planning to close that ghetto in December. So in the case of our ghetto, they decided just going to come in and they're going to shoot everybody. So my uncle came into the ghetto, came up to our apartment and warned us and said, I can't get you out, but maybe we can, you can hide here. Maybe we can make a false room in your apartment. And he got us the materials, and the people there, the adults in the 30 people, actually constructed a false wall in the living room right behind a stove, a wood burning stove, which was the only source of heat. And he told us when this would be happening. And a couple of days before, everybody piled into this room, had a little door on the ground level right behind the stove where they had a lot of wood. And so what they were able to do is crawl in all the people, brought some food and with him, and the last people coming in would move the pile of wood so it covered the little opening that they crawled through.
Right.
And sure enough, as you saw in Schindler's List, the Germans came and they searched each apartment. And when they came through our apartment, it was empty. There was nobody there. And they saw a stove, they saw a pile of wood, but they never saw the entry into the back room that we made. And the 30 some odd people were in that room for 3 days, no bathroom, 3 days, while the Germans systematically went through, brought people out, put them in the courtyard, and shot them. And at the end of 3 days, all the shooting and the screaming stopped, and the 30 of us were alive, and 670 Jewish men, women, and children were murdered, lying dead. If you look at what you have and say, this is all mine because I've worked hard and I'm smart, and so I have no responsibility to give it to anybody else, you're really shutting off a huge amount of satisfaction and happiness in your life. If you say, I've been very, very blessed, I've done my part, I've worked really hard, but the Almighty has watched over me and blessed me just the way the Torah says. The Torah says, there will always be needy people in your land. So open your hand to your brother. And the more that you do, the more I will bless you. That really works. People read that a lot, but they don't believe it, but it really works. And so once you do that, once you have that attitude, and I also had great role models. My mom was extremely generous. She was born into enormous wealth. She lost it all. In this country, she worked very hard. She didn't have a lot of wealth, but she had a lot of spirit and a lot of courage, and she was very generous with what she had. So I have to say that generosity is one of the secrets of happiness. There were millions of young people just like you, who are 15, 16, 17, and 18, who never had a chance to live their lives. They were cut down right when they were getting started. Mm-hmm. You are their representatives today. And when you look at your life going forward and you try to achieve and you try to become successful in whatever you try, you have to do it for yourself, first of all, but also remember that you have to do it for them because you're their representatives today. They are not here. They could never live their lives because of what happened, but you can, and they can motivate you to be greater than you think you can be. So think about that and think about standing on their shoulders as well.
ברשות ראש הישיבה, dear TABC faculty members, dear students, you've each given a candle, a yahrzeit candle. Each candle has a barcode and a name of an individual who perished in the Holocaust. Tonight, when you will light this candle, you will scan the barcode, and the barcode on the phone will give you a story, will tell the story of a specific individual, how he lived, when did he die, but mainly how did they live. As a grandson to Holocaust survivors, I see specific significance. I'm particularly touched by this project, and I felt inspired to share this with TABC tonight. Yehi zichram baruch, may the memory of these kedoshim be blessed.
Mole Rachamim Shoichein Bameroimim Hamitzei Menuchoni Choina Al Kanefei Hashechina B'mahalois Kidoshim Uteharim Kizaya Harakiya Mazirim Hes Nishmais Acheinu B'nei Yisrael HaKidoshim Shehom Meso V'shenehergo V'shenisrefo V'shenitbeyo V'shenechneko Al Kidushas Hashem Bahavor Shani Noider Tzedakah Noider Tzedakah Biada Zikoras Nishmoisehem Began Eden Tehei Menuchosom Lochein Balorachamim Yastireim B'seiser Knafav Li'olamim V'yitzerar Achayim Es Nishmoisehem Adonai Ho Nachalosam V'yanuchu B'shalom Amishkvoisehem